Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be be here with you today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Southwest Public Policy Institute's live stream panel, Saving the Electoral College Battle Royale Against the National Popular Vote. My name is Patrick Brenner. I'm the president of SPPI. Our mission at SPPI is to improve the quality of life in the American Southwest by formulating, promoting, and defending sound public policy solutions based on the principles of free enterprise, personal responsibility, limited government, individual freedom, and traditional American values. I always have to read that. I can never remember that. We're dedicated to delivering better living through better policy. SPPI is a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization. Donations to the Institute are tax deductible. Our work is sponsored by viewers like you. Thank you so much. You can help us keep these events free. I invite you to make a contribution today at southwestpolicy.com/donate. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for today. Today we have Trent England. Trent is the executive director and founder of Save Our States. He has previously served as executive vice president for both the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs and the Freedom Foundation, and as a legal policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. He is a producer of the feature-length documentary Safeguard, an Electoral College Story. Sean Parnell should be joining us. He's having some technical difficulties, so hopefully we can get him on. And in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dowd Muska, our Vice President of Research at SPPI, who will moderate today's panel. Dowd, take it away.
Thank you so much to our viewers, and thanks to our guests, our single guests, which hopefully will expand to a second guest. Thanks for joining us, Trent. And this one is very near and dear to my heart. So I think I'm going to have a little fun, and I might inject a little too much of my opinion on this one as a big believer in the Electoral College. One of the things, Trent, that we mistake sometimes as policy wonks is that we assume a level of knowledge that maybe other normal, regular Americans don't have. So I kind of want to start on a very, very basic level, particularly if we have young people, college students watching this who may not really know about how we pick the president. We don't really vote. When we go to vote on the the first Tuesday after the first Monday every 4 years, we're not really voting for that man or woman. We're actually voting for a slate of electors at the state level in our individual states. Can you just give us the basics and a little background of how this works? We also may have some Europeans watching who don't understand the Electoral College either.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, that is the right place to start. And really, our states have done a great disservice to voters, because it used to be, and it's still this way in some states, but not many, that when you went to vote, quote unquote, for president, you got a ballot that listed, the name of the president and vice president, but then underneath it listed all of the presidential electors who are the people you're really voting for. They're a slate of presidential electors who are, in almost all cases, pledged to support the Republican nominee or the Democrat nominee or the Libertarian Party nominee or the Green Party nominee or whomever, but you're really voting for these electors. So where did all this come from? And particularly for your European viewers, or even just anybody who understands a parliamentary system, I think that's a good place to start, because that's actually where the American founders started. The rough draft of the Constitution, called the Virginia Plan, would have created a parliamentary system where Congress would have chosen the president. And the Electoral College, as it happens, not coincidentally, is based on exactly the same amount of power that states have in Congress. Every state has the number of presidential electors, which means the number of presidential electoral votes, as they have members of Congress. That's the U.S. House plus the U.S. Senate. So the smallest state has 2 senators plus 1 member of the U.S. House, so they get 3. And as you go up, bigger states get more because they have more members of the U.S. House. So why did the founders not just create a parliamentary system? That, most of the major democracies around the world use a parliamentary system. And that is a 2-step election when it comes to their prime minister, right? Their equivalent of our president. People vote for members of parliament. Members of parliament vote for their prime minister. Pretty straightforward. Well, the American founders looked at that, considered that, didn't really like it because you don't get the same separation of powers. You don't have an independent executive in that system. Your legislative and executive branches are, very directly connected. They wanted a system where you could create more checks and balances. And so they said, let's not do that. Let's create this electoral college, which is based on a parliamentary system. Again, each state has the same amount of power as it has in Congress. And it's a two-step electoral process, right? We vote in our states, we choose people, those people vote for president. That's just like a parliamentary system. The difference is those people don't do anything else. They're not politicians. They actually can't be. If you look in the Constitution, Article 2, they can't be federal constitutions. They can't even be a postmaster general. They can't hold any federal office to serve as a presidential elector. And so this is where the system came from and also how it works. We vote in our states. We choose these presidential electors. They vote for president. That means that the election is conducted state by state. States keep control over the election, and our national politics can't become regionalized, because to win, you have to win a bunch of states. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that. But that's the basics of the Electoral College. I think it is easiest for people who understand the parliamentary system, at least, to think of it as a kind of pop-up in-the-moment parliament that we choose, except they have one job. They're not politicians. Their only job is cast the votes for president and vice president.
Yeah, and I guess I call it, when I defend the Electoral College system, I call it sort of unique and quirky in terms of American history. But it obviously it allows for a candidate who does not win the majority of the popular vote to become president. That is not something that happens very often, and we can get into the activists who are trying to do away with this. But I was clicking around on one of the pro national popular vote sites the other day, and they said that, oh well, 5 times out of our 46 presidents, this has a minority popular vote candidate has become president. That's not terribly honest, because there's actually been 59 presidential races. Just because there's been 46 presidents, it doesn't. I mean, we decide, the Electoral College meets every 4 years, so it's done that for 59 times. So 5 times a candidate has won the majority of the Electoral College, but not won a majority of the popular vote. So 5 times in 59 contests. Don't count by president, count by contests.
Yeah.
So 5 times out of 59, it's not all that common. So if this idea that it's some sort of way of staging a coup against the American popular will, historically, it just doesn't happen that often.
That's right. And even that 5 number is really misleading, because they're counting in that 5. And, when you're talking about the number 5, right? Like every one of those becomes consequential. They're talking about 1824, when there was not a popular vote election, or there was not a national popular vote. Not every state held a popular vote to choose its presidential electors. That is, using that election, and I know to some people this is going to sound like really obscure and in the weeds, but that is when the other side uses that election as one of these examples, they're just not telling the truth. Because had there been a popular vote election in every state, it's very likely that John Quincy Adams, rather than Andrew Jackson, would have had the most popular votes. That's not even, that's not even something that is that's particularly controversial among historians. So you got to take that election, set it aside. No national popular vote, and if there had been, probably would have aligned with the Electoral College. The next questionable one is 1876. Nobody knows who won the most popular votes in 1876, because there was, in fact, massive systematic vote suppression by the Democrats and fairly substantial election fraud by both parties, but particularly after the election by Republicans, because they sort of looked at the Democrats. They said, well, you're suppressing the vote, so we're going to go out there and we're going to commit our own, questionable election practices, throwing out whole ballot boxes from, whole counties and things like that. So nobody knows who won the most popular votes in 1876. And, that's an election where folks who don't like the Electoral College oftentimes focus on, oh, there was a corrupt bargain. Oh, this is terrible. Reconstruction was ended and all this, which again is really disingenuous, because what happened in that election, there was a lot of election fraud. Again, nobody could say at the time for sure who should have won. It was, it was extremely close in a number of states. The national margin was very close. But the reality is that probably the resolution in the House prevented very clearly racist vote suppression in the South from stealing a presidential election. So again, I mean that one is less clear than 1824. But when activists say, "Oh, 1876 came out the wrong way," there's a degree to which they're sort of embracing racist vote suppression. Now, certainly not intentionally, but as a matter of convenience to make their argument. So I would really. There are three elections where clearly the national popular vote result went one way, the Electoral College went the other way. That would be 2016, 2000, and 1884. And the reality is, in each of those elections, it was not a misfire. It was not a mistake. The Electoral College worked exactly as it was intended to work to prevent a political party that had become much more regional rather than getting alerts on my computer here. A political party that had become regional rather than national from winning a national election. That is what the Electoral College is supposed to do.
Sure, sure. Folks, I invite you. I'm sure we have a lot of comments and questions, so please weigh in, whatever platform.
I am, Dowd, I'm not hearing you now for some reason.
Oh, okay. We will work to resolve that, and I'll just take this opportunity, folks. If you want to throw your questions and your comments out, whatever platform you're weighing in on. I think we're live on about, probably, knowing Patrick, we're probably on about 7 or 8 or 17 or 18 different streams. We're also asking for your vote by direct popular vote. And we actually have a website. It is called, that's actually our website, southwestpolicy.com. We're going to be taking your votes on what you want to call our weekly broadcast. And there's a bunch of different choices for that. And some are kind of funky, and some are kind of funny, and some are more serious. So if you just go to southwestpolicy.com/name it, NAME-IT, NAME-IT, you can vote for what we are going to call our weekly Friday broadcast. And of course, we're grateful for all the folks who've been tuning in our early broadcasts as we work this out. We had a great conversation last week on crime in one southwestern American city, and Albuquerque, a city that I happen to be in right now. And as we work to get back our guests and deal with our technical glitches, I will just remind everyone, this is the Southwest Public Policy Institute. You can contribute to our efforts at southwestpolicy.com, and we cover the 8 states of the American Southwest. That would be Texas, starting east, Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, of course, the Four Corners areas, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and California. And we're very, very grateful for you folks tuning in to our programming. And one quote I was going to throw Trent's way, and we're still working to get back with him, is the notion of, this is actually an interesting quote from the Wall Street Journal a number of years ago, back in 2004, defending the Electoral College. If direct democracy, 50% plus one, is sort of the ultimate god for our national popular vote activists, and they have been. We'll get into the states that have actually moved forward on that, and are I think they have, we're not to 270 electoral votes yet, but I think it's almost it's in the 180s or 190s so far. A number of states have adopted the national popular vote model, including Colorado and New Mexico here in the American Southwest, and California. But a quote from the Wall Street Journal. And again, this is regarding the point of if the 50% plus one is how we should decide everything, and that's how we get good government in America. What about the modern era, 1948, 1960, 1968, 1992, 1996, 2000. Now, this editorial was written in 2004. Those elections, the popular vote was not a majority vote. It was a plurality vote. Bill Clinton, 1992, he became president with 43% of the popular vote. Not exactly a ringing mandate if you think 50% plus one is what's needed. So the issue of direct democracy, 50% plus one, is how we should determine everything, whether it's a legislative body or whether it's the delegates we send to legislative bodies, whether it's lobbying in piece of legislation. It's it's problematic. And just personally, as someone who leans toward the limited government side, I don't really care much about the mechanism of how we make decisions in government. It's not really that important to me. I care about the outcome in terms of preserving our Enlightenment values, our traditional American framers, founders' values of limited government, capitalism. I also throw personal responsibility in there as well. We're working to get our guests back, and we're going to talk to them about that notion of what's so great about democracy? Just because you get 50% plus one in an election, just because you get 50% plus one when you're voting on legislation, does that mean you're getting good outcomes? Does that mean you're
Yeah.
getting good government? And I'm happy to say Trent is back, and we can hear him. Trent, I don't know if you heard my comment about a Wall Street Journal editorial back in 2004, but they were making the point that if 50% plus one is necessary, we've had a lot of plurality popular vote presidents in recent American history. We're talking post-war history. So I'm interested in your thoughts and in Sean's thoughts about this notion of making 50% plus one your God. Personally, I'm quite skeptical about that. Your thoughts?
No, that's exactly right. And people miss that point that no matter what election system you have, and even if you take, the biggest modern democracy, with essentially these sort of, Enlightenment values, is France. Not an especially successful experiment in Republican government, given the number of do-overs they've had to have. I think they're on their sixth republic now, but still, right? I mean, France is a modern democratic country. They're the largest to have a national popular vote system, right? They are the place that tries to put this democratic mantra into effect. So they have a national vote for their president, and then they have a runoff to make sure that the winner has, in theory, 50% plus one. And of course, technically, the winner always has that. But they have two problems. One is in that system, you do that by having an initial election, sort of like a primary where everybody runs. And so the candidates who come out of that oftentimes are coming out with, around 20 to 25% of the vote, which means that the candidates who go to the runoff together have less than 50% support, right? So right there, you have a problem. You may force people to vote for one of two candidates, but the majority of French voters in most recent elections actually don't like either of those candidates and would prefer someone else. And the corollary of that, the other problem is when you have that runoff, a lot of people don't show up. So you may register 50% plus one or 55 or even 60%, but it's of the people who choose to go and show up in that election. And that is not a flaw unique to any particular system. It's just the reality of democratic elections. I mean, of course, Australia they fine you if you don't go and vote, but what does that do, right? I mean, you're just putting a gun to people's head and saying, well, you have to show up because we want to claim some mystical democratic mandate. I mean, the whole idea actually leaves the realm of political science and really does become some kind of, you said democracy as your God, or 50% plus one is your God. It really is a religious idea. It's or at least a philosophical idea. It is not an idea of political science that somehow, if you just hold a gun to people's head and you make them vote for one or two candidates, and therefore, you claim a majority mandate, that somehow means anything, right? You can get terrible public policy and tyranny out of a system like that. So no, I mean, I agree completely. And I think all of the talk of democracy, people forget democracy is a process. And at the end of the day, what matters about a process is that it produces good outcomes, right? If we focus entirely on the process, we're going to miss what's much more important.
Yeah, and I think people in America frequently mistake. I was called a communist online a number of years ago. Someone who is a libertarian and spent 30 years fighting big government. It was interesting to be called a communist when I was writing about if you choose on election day to sort of opt out, you don't like the candidates, they're both big government candidates, you live in a deeply blue state that wants to regulate every part of your life, your personal life, your economic life, it's okay to not vote. Withdrawing in disgust, as that wonderful quote is not the same as apathy. Maybe there are other ways that you want to influence government that you think are more effective than casting a vote that's probably not going to really contribute to the outcome very much. And I was called a communist. So there is this you phrased it wonderfully. I mean, you're getting lost in the process rather than the outcome. And frankly, I think and this was a Republican Party hack who called me this. I think there are a lot of Republicans and conservatives who can fall prey to that democracy as religion, the images that evoke going into the voting booth and standing in line to vote where people don't have the right to vote in totalitarian governments. And it really does get the imagery and the optics and the mystical elements of this can confuse the ultimate goal, which I think if you're generally a person on the right, you want limited accountable government, which I think is what the founders favored. Hopefully we have Sean who can hear us.
Yep.
Can we hear Sean? We can hear Sean. Sean, I'm going to ask you a question. I will also kick it over to Trent, but there's skepticism about democracy, and I think I certainly am included in that. But there's going even beyond that, and I know I'll probably be called a communist again. Many of the founders were very publicly hostile. One of my favorite founders is Fisher Ames, who was part of the Constitutional Convention in Massachusetts. He has a wonderful quote. I've used it in columns over the years, and if I can call it up right now, quote, "A democracy is a volcano which conceals the fiery materials of its own destruction." James Madison, the father of the Constitution, quote, "Measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority." Interesting take from the very wise men who established our government. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and this is something that I wind up talking an awful lot about. And I think it's important that we distinguish between healthy democracy and unhealthy democracy. I mean, when the founders were talking about the system of government that they wanted to establish, they actually use the term democracy quite favorably in many cases. But what they had in mind was a healthy democracy that included checks and balances, separation of powers, having different, different elements of the government, different branches of the government responsive to different constituencies, basically. So, for example, the federal judiciary is I think, a cornerstone of our democratic society, but we don't elect our judges. The constituency for appointing judges is the president and the Senate, and they built this into our federal constitution in numerous ways. And what they built was a healthy democracy that ensures that the people generally are going to prevail over the long run. A majority will, but you had to temper the majority. You had to limit the majority. I think we all understand that, if the majority wanted to outlaw a certain religion, you can't do that because of the First Amendment. This is one of these counter-majoritarian features of our Constitution that our founding fathers established. And they did this over and over and over again, setting up a system of government in which being a mere majority or even just a raw plurality is not always enough to carry the day. And that's a very important feature of our democracy. And I think that what a lot of critics of the Electoral College, as well as critics of the U.S. Senate and just a number of the features of our constitutional order, I think that what they miss is that if you simply have a system in which the majority or a plurality always gets its way on everything, you don't actually have a healthy democracy. You have a mob. You have exactly what Fisher Ames was talking about. You have a unhealthy democracy in which the rights of minorities are trampled, and you just do not wind up with a healthy society if you do that.
Definitely. Trent, I want to take it a little more up to the current day, because when those of us who really appreciate the Enlightenment and the founders and the framers, and we take these men as a rare breed of men who were really brilliant, not flawless, but were brilliant and laid a foundation for our country. I still think the United States, even with its many problems, is still the last best hope for mankind, and our values are. But it's easy when we do talk about our founders and our framers and the Enlightenment. It's easy for opponents to launch the argument, evil old white men who own slaves. I've been looking just the last couple of days at the dates of anti-democratic adoption of measures at the state level. I'm talking particularly tax and expenditure limitations, many of which are actually put into state constitutions. This movement began in the 1970s. It has continued right up until the current day. So restricting the ability of the legislature, particularly in our beloved Tabor Taxpayer Bill of Rights in Colorado, restricting the ability of the legislature, regardless of what the vote is, to expand government beyond population growth and inflation. Many other states, you need supermajorities, 60%, 2/3, in order to impose tax hikes. Anti-democratic measures, it's not something about guys in powdered wigs. It brings us right up to the common era. It's not that unprecedented in our lifetime. So it's a little hypocritical, I think, for the national popular vote people to say, well, we all agree on 50% plus one. From coast to coast, we've been establishing anti-democratic measures just in the last couple decades.
No, that's exactly right. And you see right now in some blue states movements to amend their state constitutions to put, abortion rights measures in their state constitutions. And why are they doing that? They're doing that partly because they want to make it hard for a future small d Democratic majority, a future legislature that might want to, have some limits on abortion, trying to make sure that they can't do that. So, I mean, the whole idea of bills of rights, and really the whole idea of constitutional government at all, is a rejection of this concept that the majority or the plurality should always and in every way rule. And I think that is something we can't point out enough, partly because all Americans agree on that, right? All Americans, the sad thing about our Constitution, one sad thing about our Constitution is that to most Americans today, I think, all that really remains of it is the Bill of Rights. People know about the Bill of Rights. When you talk about the Constitution, they think about something like the First Amendment or the Second Amendment. But that is to say, right, even though people have lost sight of all the other checks and balances that are supposed to be the primary protections of our liberty, people want a government where majorities, pluralities cannot just do whatever they want. And from there, I think it gets, once you establish that as a value, it gets a little bit easier to explain to people why we have checks and balances like the Electoral College.
Yeah, and I just, before we, I want to move on to the opponents, and I know you guys are really just, your fangs are dripping. You want to tear apart those arguments, but I will leave the defense of the Electoral College to none other than Richard Lempert from the Brookings Institution. No more swamp creature-esque than the Brookings institution. Built into our system of checks and balances are several undemocratic institutions, most notably our entire judiciary. Something Sean mentioned, Marbury v. Madison, judicial review. A legislature can adopt a law 50% plus one, and judges can invalidate it. That goes back over 200 years. But Lempert said several procedures, including amending the Constitution and overriding presidential vetoes, require super majorities. The nation seems to have survived these limitations on majoritarian democracy reasonably well, enduring perhaps in part because of them. Brookings Institution, folks. All right, Sean, we got to get to the bad guys here. We got to get to the villains in this drama. They are well-heeled, well-funded. They have actually achieved some success in state after state here in the Southwest. They've won their cause in California, Colorado, and New Mexico. I'm sorry to say that the voters narrowly in Colorado approved the surrender of their Electoral College power. Give us an update on what these people are doing, how they're achieving it, and what level of success they've enjoyed so far.
Right. So this whole thing basically got started, at least legislatively, back in, I think, 2007. Maryland was the first state to pass it. And then very quickly, a number of other sort of blue Democrat-dominated states like Hawaii and Washington, Vermont, Massachusetts, you can kind of, figure out who the usual suspects are. They all passed it as well. And then it kind of, floundered for a while after it got through the states where there were a number of legislators who were just really torqued over the whole, Bush becoming president thing in 2000. And what they have been doing for at least a decade now, I would say, is quite often working behind the scenes, trying to build support for the compact among Republicans and Democrats, having very little success with Republicans, having some success with Democrats. And basically they've just been sort of grinding it out. They've been very well funded throughout the entire time. They're able to, hire Republican lobbyists in a state and go in and try and, pitch them their tale, and then they'll hire Democratic lobbyists as well that are tight with leadership, and they'll get them on board. And then Trent and I and others come in, and we have to kind of explain from ground one, why do we have the Electoral College? Why is this important? What are the problems with the compact? And I feel like we'd done a pretty good job of that. And then after 2016, of course, in the election of Donald Trump, there was a new burst of interest, shall we say, particularly among the left, in getting rid of the Electoral College. And because they understood that a constitutional amendment and building national consensus are hard things, they really, refocused on the National Popular Vote Compact. And so they again had a burst of success in getting, your, if I recall correctly, former state of Connecticut, as well as Oregon and Colorado, Delaware, to sign on to the compact. But they also started to run into some real significant problems. Basically, what I think happened is, as this became closer to being a real thing, that it might actually one day go into effect, I think an awful lot of people, Democrat and Republicans, started to take a very close look at the details and trying to understand exactly what was being proposed here. And that was why you had, Democratic majorities in Maine and New Hampshire and Virginia in recent years reject it, why you had a Democratic governor in Nevada veto it after it passed the legislature. So what's happening now is sort of a war of attrition in some ways. And they are very active in a number of states right now, 4 or 5, trying to, push the compact. And we've had a fair amount of success in opposing them. But at the same time, they have a not quite unlimited budget, but a fairly substantial budget. They're able to throw a lot of resources in. And so as a result, it has made it out of committee in Minnesota, and then just last night in the Nevada Assembly. And so, potentially we're fighting there. We're trying to educate legislators on the problems with the compact, the benefits of the Electoral College. But, politics and policy can be kind of rough, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And we're just going to have to see at the end of the year where we wind up.
Sure. I'm going to kick it over to Trent for one question, but I want to remind everyone, if you have comments, if you have questions, whatever platform you're on, send them our way, and we will be happy to pass them on to our guests. I'm delighted that Sean mentioned Nevada. I lived there for a number of years. You want to trying to make some partisan argument out of this, folks. A Democratic governor in the state of Nevada vetoed national popular vote, the surrender of the Silver States electoral votes to the national popular vote. I believe it's 2019. And let me give you the quote, and I will ask Trent about this, because I think it's probably my favorite argument against the national popular vote, because I'm a fan of flyover country. I like flyover country. I live in flyover country, and I don't intend to move back to the East Coast anytime soon, hopefully ever. This is what Governor Sisolak, Democratic governor, said in vetoing the national popular vote in the Silver State. Quote, once effective, the national popular vote interstate compact, that's the sort of official agreement by which these states are surrendering their sovereignty. The national popular vote interstate compact could diminish the role of smaller states like Nevada in national electoral contests and force Nevada's electors to side with whoever wins the national popular vote rather than the candidate Nevadans choose. In cases like this, where Nevada's interests could diverge from the interests of large states, I will always stand up for Nevada. Now, I'm not a press agent for Governor Sisolak, who's not even in office anymore. He was defeated. But Trent, that's an interesting argument, and lockstep thinking on the Democratic Party on the blue side is pro national popular vote. Here's a Democratic governor saying we're a small state. We want to retain our sovereignty in the Electoral College, and this guy put himself on the line by rejecting this. How do you respond to that argument? And is it an argument you find effective as you go out throughout flyover country?
So that argument really just butts right up against what we talked about in the first half of the program, which is this democratic dogma, small d, right? This idea that I've literally talked to people where they will say, I don't care if this is bad for my state. I don't care if this is bad for constitutional government. I don't care about any of that. The candidate with the most votes should just win no matter what, even if it causes regional politics or instability or whatever, right? That is a view that's out there. And credit to Governor Sisolak that he rose above all of that, right? To take what is the practical, long-term, and also profoundly American position that no, we actually want a system of government that works. And part of what has made our system of government work until now is that we have these checks and balances that in cases like this give a unique voice to the voters of Nevada or the voters of New Mexico or the voters of Colorado or Minnesota or Maine. That is, or at least historically has been an American value. And it's certainly a value that is expressed in the Electoral College. The governor was exactly right. Just as a matter of mathematics, if Nevada had passed the national popular vote and the compact took effect, right, Californians would have more power. More power several times over. I don't know what the exact population difference is, but I think we're talking about like 5 or 6 or maybe 10 times more power over Nevada's electoral votes than voters in Nevada, right? Because California is just bigger. Under our current system, because California is bigger, California gets more votes in the Electoral College for California, but those votes represent California, right? Under the national popular vote system, California voters not only would get to vote for their own presidential electors, but they get to vote for everybody else's presidential electors too, which means that they get a larger say than voters in those states because they're just bigger, right? That's a difference that to some people, I guess, seems small or even inconsequential, but Governor Sisolak recognized, right? That really turns flyover country into flyover country where, you really can just write it off. And a great example of this, actually, in kind of the national popular vote folks putting their foot in their mouth a couple of years ago, is that, Maine splits up their electoral votes. And particularly the 2nd Congressional District of Maine is a swing district in congressional races. And because they elect one member of the Electoral College from that district in particular, because they split up their votes, that district is a swing district in presidential politics. And so, it attracts a little bit of extra attention. And there are a lot of lobster fishermen who live in Maine's 2nd district. And the national popular vote folks attacked the Trump administration because they had given some attention to lobster fishermen in Maine and basically said that they should, that they should have the same recognition in a particular federal program as other agricultural interest groups that are a lot bigger. But the national popular vote folks said, isn't this terrible? We have a presidential system that gives 2,000 Maine lobster fishermen a voice in national politics, right? Now, Sean and I looked at this and said, that's crazy. Isn't this a success of our system that 2,000 Maine lobster fishermen can actually be heard above the din of national politics because we have this system that makes things more granular, that forces national politicians to care about more interest groups in more parts of the country rather than just focusing on the biggest media markets and, LA and Houston and Chicago and New York. And, you throw in a few more and you got a bunch of big media markets. And, you don't have to go very much farther than that to build a pretty efficient political base or even a national vote plurality. No, it's our system is a great triumph, and the folks on the other side, it's shocking that they don't realize the truth in what Governor Sisolak wrote in his veto message.
I'm going to ask Sean in a second. We have a question coming in, and it's actually the next question that I was going to ask. So it really proves how intelligent our audience is, folks. Proud of you on that one. For the record, folks, I don't know, and maybe Trent or Sean could correct me. I don't think that the former Nevada governor, when he vetoed that bill, which clearly angered, I'm sure, many people in his party, I don't recall, but I'm pretty sure that the Kennedy Family Profile and Courage Award was not awarded to that governor. I'd have to go check on that one, but
I think that's right.
I don't think so. Sean, more of a technical question. I was gonna ask this anyway. States adjusting their electoral architecture in order to kick it over to the national vote. I would say surrender really to the national vote. We're picking a president, we're picking the chief executive, we're picking the commander in chief. The question came in: how is this even legal? The Constitution mandates the electoral college system, but it doesn't mandate how states send their electors to Washington. Can you flesh that out on the technical side, and how this is the mechanisms by which states are surrendering their electoral college votes?
Yeah, so right now, and this has been the case for a century and a half, really, at least, most states use what's called a winner-take-all system. If you get a majority or a plurality of the vote in a state, then you get all of that state's presidential electors. Both Maine and Nebraska do it a little bit differently. They do it by congressional district. And there are a number of other ways that states can allocate their electors while still, ensuring that it is the voice of their state is being heard. So I've heard people talk about, doing a proportional system or a threshold system, or drawing elector-specific districts in states that, only have one member of Congress, but you've got 2 senators, so you have 3 electors. You can actually draw 3 electoral districts just for the purpose of electing the president, electing your presidential electors if a state wanted to do that. Now, what National Popular Vote has done is come along and decide that, well, because there is so much, in their mind, virtually unlimited discretion in how states decide to pick their presidential electors, what they've said is that this means that a state can decide that they will, instead of listening to the people of their own state, they will go ahead and simply essentially defer or outsource the decision of who wins their electoral votes, and go along with whoever it is that they've figured out is the national popular vote winner. There's a bunch of problems with that, but from a constitutional perspective, to me, this really does seem to undermine the core federalism that's at the heart of the Electoral College, which is that each state gets a voice in the selection of the president. And it does give a little bit of a boost to the lower population states. And what National Popular Vote tries to do, of course, is eliminate that. And I feel that that is probably where one of the biggest constitutional problems with this is that it eliminates one of the features in the Constitution that was very clearly intended to give the less populous states a bit of a boost in their, in selecting the president. National Popular Vote eliminates that. That's going to be a constitutional problem, I think. But that's basically their argument. States can do anything they want. What we're calling them to do fits under anything they want. And so, they think it's legal based on that.
Sure. And the fighting continues. I'm going to ask Trent about the pushback. You gentlemen and others, and I'm sure your organization has a lot of people who believe in the Electoral College and contribute of their own money. Very deep-pocketed, left-wing media, coastal elites want to destroy the Electoral College, save our states, and I'm sure there's probably grassroots efforts in individual states that are friendly with Save Our States, but maybe not formally affiliated. Talk about the resistance. Talk about what resources the good guys have on this. Talk about the kind of work that you do. Obviously, you two gentlemen and others are literally traveling the country fighting this. Tell us about the counter-revolution, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when the other side launched this in 2006, they won their first state in 2007, as Sean mentioned. I started tracking this. A colleague of mine, my boss at the time, Bob Williams, who's since passed on, he came back from a legislative conference and said, we need to look at this. This National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is very savvy, is extremely well funded. And so we started tracking it and then launched Save Our States in 2009 because there up until that point really wasn't a lot of pushback. And one of the tricks that the other side uses is they present National Popular Vote as if it's just a concept, right? I literally had conversations with legislators, particularly early on, who thought that maybe it was like a non-binding resolution asking Congress to amend the Constitution, right? Because many people logically assume that to change the Electoral College, you'd have to amend the Constitution. And so NPV has benefited from a lot of misunderstandings about what this is, how serious it is, and also how problematic a lot of the details of the compact could be. But we at Save Our States have found that there are wonderful, patriotic people all around the country who get it, who just understand how important this system is to the country, to their particular state. And so we've seen a real outpouring of people contacting their state legislators, which is the most important thing to do. If you're in a state that has passed this, contact your legislators and make sure that they're at least working to repeal it, because legislatures can repeal this. They can get out of the compact. And frankly, it is helpful even in Colorado, New Mexico, states like that where current legislature not going to do it, right? But it's still helpful to have people introducing bills to repeal National Popular Vote. We've seen a lot of activity in New Jersey and Connecticut and Washington State where you got people raising the flag and saying, hey, look, remember, our state is in this. Our state can get out of it, should get out of it, and calling people together that way. In other states, we have seen, like in South Dakota, North Dakota, Georgia, Arizona, legislators passing resolutions that say we support the Electoral College, we reject the National Popular Vote. The best of those resolutions calls on their state attorney general to be prepared to sue other states should they try to put this into effect and thereby really rig the Electoral College process. So there is a nationwide effort going on against this National Popular Vote campaign. But as Sean said, they're extremely wealthy. The guy who runs the National Popular Vote campaign literally invented and patented the scratch-off lottery system back in the 1970s, and then spent the 1980s. If you want to know sort of where all this comes from, not just the money, but also the tactics. This guy, John Koza, who's a Californian, big donor to Nancy Pelosi because they live near each other out there in the San Francisco area, and John Koza spent the 1980s traveling around lobbying state legislatures to adopt the scratch-off lottery system, promising them, some people will remember this, that if they adopted a state lottery, it would solve all of their education funding problems forever, right? So John Koza has sold states a bill of goods in the past. The only beneficiary of this really was John Koza, and now he's using his winnings from conning states with state lotteries to now try to con states with the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So, I mean, it's a tawdry tale of what I would say really is self-interested deceit.
Hypocrisy on the progressive left. I've never encountered that in my career, gentlemen. I'm shocked. Just again, point of personal interest here. I'm glad Trent mentioned the, money in politics. Our friends on the left hate, but they're okay with it if you want to destroy the national popular vote. They're big believers in inclusion, but if you're a Maine lobsterman, you shouldn't count in presidential elections. And then, of course, finally, buy locally, act locally. Apparently, don't vote locally. Your local preferences don't matter when it comes to picking a president. So that's those are just at least 3 points. I enjoy pointing out the hypocrisy of our progressive
Yeah,
friends.
I used to tell people, I used to live in Washington State. That's where I'm originally from. And yeah, I tell people, why do you want all your food grown within 5 miles of your house? Why do you want all your political decisions made 2,000 miles away, right? That doesn't make any sense.
Yep. And it's certainly something we encounter in the West with so much federal ownership of land, federal control of land. Many of those decisions are often made by people in Washington and Maryland and Virginia who rarely ever get out this way. Folks, we are dangerously low on time. There's a few minutes left to get your questions and comments in. So weigh in on whatever platform you are tuning in on. And of course, go to southwestpolicy.com/name it, NAME-IT, because we still haven't decided what our television program is to be called, but we're going to open that up to a popular vote. We may even allow international voting on that one. Sean, what does the future of presidential politics, presidential campaigns look like? I really despise people who always try to catastrophize what would happen if our side doesn't get our way. So I'm not talking about, dogs and cats living together and fire and brimstone raining from the heavens, but in a reasonable way. What do presidential campaigns and elections look like if the national popular vote people get their way? It seems to me this is going to be, it's just rather obvious. Places like Florida and Texas and California and New Jersey and Illinois, the big boys, they're going to just soak up all the oxygen in the room. And places like New Mexico and Idaho and the lobstermen in Maine are really not going to matter.
Yeah, and I would say fire and brimstone, but just kidding. So I mean, what will a presidential campaigns look like under national popular vote? I think that the actual campaign process will look very different. You will have campaigns trying to leverage their resources, their money that they use to buy television ads, their candidates' times, their policy focus, and their turnout operations where they can get the most bang for their buck. And that's the big metropolitan areas, New York City, Atlanta, Los Angeles, San Francisco. And as part of that, you will wind up with a pretty exclusive focus on the largest interest groups, the largest constituencies. So, the soccer moms and the NASCAR dads and the student debt holders and union members. And all of those groups get plenty of attention, under the current system because those are large national groups and they have, people all over the country and in every state. But what gets left out, and I'm a product of rural Oregon. And so my, framework on this is asking, will people in rural America be included? The big metropolitan areas, both the cities and the suburbs that surround them, they will get all of the attention, is my concern. And those, 2,000 lobstermen in Maine, or really any other small group that right now, because of the Electoral College, has a chance to get heard, they're simply going to be ignored, because why on earth would a presidential campaign that's trying to move hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of votes in order to win not a majority, just a plurality of the vote, why are they going to bother with 2,000 people who live in, a town in Ohio that, maybe has had a train derailment happen recently, and there's some issues related to that? That's not something that's really going to rise up to the level of, 1 million doctors or 20 million student loan holders, or, think of any other large group, large constituency. That is going to be where all of the attention is focused. Large constituency groups and major metropolitan.
Sure, and also you've got hyper local problems. I'm thinking of particularly sort of land use, environmental, energy issues that people on the coast, they don't think it affects them. They don't think about these issues. We're talking about, listings or delistings of endangered species. That's not going to really matter if you're out there in big urbanized areas trying to get as many votes as possible. Now, it'll impact those voters down the road, but it won't impact them immediately. So it's a wonderful example. I'll always defend flyover country. I was born on the coast, but I choose to live in flyover country. Trent, we are so close to the end. Here in the Southwest, Utah and New Mexico, their legislative sessions have wrapped up, so the people in those states can be happy. No more damage, at least for a little while longer. A lot of states, most states are still in session. What does it look? What do you see on the ground right now? Any chance of a repeal anywhere? Any chance of an adoption anywhere with these sessions still underway?
Yeah, I don't believe we have any repeal bills that are still alive in any states. The big challenge right now is Minnesota, where the Democrats have slim majorities in each chamber. They have a very liberal governor, Governor Walz there, and they don't really have enough support to pass national popular vote, particularly in the state Senate where they only have a 1-vote majority. But that's not stopping them. What they have done, the folks pushing this, is put it into omnibus election bills in both the House and the Senate there. So they've tucked this in the Senate bill. It's like on page 80 of this bill. So that's about totally different things, regulating lobbying, campaign finance, all this other stuff. And then at the end they say, oh, and by the way, we're going to give away our state's electoral votes. They've done that because it is very hard to almost impossible for a Democrat to vote against one of these omnibus bills. If you do that, you're likely to get all of the things that you want killed by the other members of your caucus. So that's the kind of, really disingenuous, politics that we're seeing being used to try to push this through in Minnesota. It's also being pushed in Michigan and in Maine. I think we're gonna win pretty easily in Maine. There are a lot of Democrats, along with all the Republicans in Maine, who recognize that this is, not just a bad idea, but a very bad idea for their small state. In Michigan, they have a year-round legislature, which means that they even have lame duck sessions up there and all kinds of things that they, I guess, have copied from the folks in Washington, D.C. for some reason. But we're keeping an eye on that in Michigan. They've also filed a ballot measure there, but they haven't gathered signatures for that yet or shown any indication that they're actually going to do that. I think they're using it as a threat to members of the legislature. So that's that plus Nevada, where they've introduced this as a potential state constitutional amendment, which is a kind of an odd twist in everything. We're watching all those states. Minnesota clearly is the biggest threat, though.
Our final 90 seconds. If people want to get involved, whether it's Save Our States or whether it's at the local level, I'm sure you can hook people up fighting at in their state capitals. What's the best way to help this effort out, whether it's with you guys or something else?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing to do, please go to saveourstates.com, connect with us on social media. If you want to be really involved, we have a Facebook private group that we vet people into. So, if you go there, it may take about a week or so for you to get through the process. But we really try to provide people everything they need to get engaged in that group. Or if you just go there to saveourstates.com and sign up for our email list. But the most important thing that you can do is email your state legislators, your state House member, your state senator, and ask them about this issue, right? Make sure that they know this is important to you. You can go to our website and find some information or send them a link or just send them your own thoughts, right? Whatever you are most comfortable with. And the other thing that's really helpful to us is if they respond and they say, hey, yeah, I'm on your side, or I'm not on your side, or, I've got more questions about this, let us know that, because we are always looking for legislative allies, legislators who want to know more about this. That is how we have won in a number of states, because we've had, just ordinary patriotic Americans on the ground talking to their state legislators, giving that information back to us, partnering with us. That literally can be more powerful than hundreds of thousands of dollars spent by the other side in lobbying. So, please do that. Connect with us. We're so thankful for all the people who have been working with us, in some cases for more than 10 years, to defend the Electoral College and the integrity of our constitutional process.
Great. And of course, the good news here is, folks, a lot of shoe leather on your part as an activist can really balance off big money from scratch off ticket entrepreneurs, or I guess rent seekers, I guess I should say, not necessarily entrepreneurs. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Folks, we can only bring you this kind of programming if we continue to receive the generous support of our viewers. Southwestpolicy.com, southwestpolicy.com. Consider kicking us a few clams. We'd love to keep this weekly live stream telecast free for all who want to watch it. We're grateful for your support. Southwestpolicy.com. We will be back next week. Thank you for joining us, and have